Right, so Donald Trump has always seemed to treat the law as something of a minor inconvenience to him. And so, in line with that way of thinking, he has decided that after everything Benjamin Netanyahu has done, the mass killing in Gaza, the starvation documented by aid agencies, the 3 active corruption indictments, the ICC warrant for starvation and murder, the real problem is the Israeli legal system daring to keep his trial running. He put that in writing too. A formal letter to Israel's President Isaac Herzog demanding a full pardon, no less. Political case, unjustified prosecution. Netanyahu leading Israel into peace. The language is his. The request is very real. Herzog's answer is on the record as well. Pardon, well, that needs a formal application. And Netanyahu hasn't filed one. And Netanyahu won't admit his guilt to do so either. Likud's 19 ministers still lined up behind him, though, and called the charges trivial. All have backed Trump's demand as well, because the law, well, it's not for them. It's for everyone else, apparently. The little people. None of it touches that ICC case, though. None of it touches Netanyahu's record of genocide or his corruption allegations themselves, either. And Trump is pushing the line that the obstacle to lasting peace is Gaza, as Netanyahu's legal bothers at home. Right, so the letter arrived with the weight of the United States behind it. It carried the presidential seal. It carried the voice of Donald Trump, nasally and horrible as it is. It was addressed to Isaac Herzog. It asked for a full pardon for Benjamin Netanyahu. There was no ambiguity in the wording. There was no diplomatic softening. Trump told Herzog that Netanyahu was guiding Israel into a time of peace. He told him the prosecution was political. He told him the trial was unjustified. He told him Netanyahu must not be diverted by legal proceedings. Evidence never has been something that's bothered Donald Trump particularly, has it? Well, the letter was released by Herzog's office, and it entered the news cycle as a result of that. Herzog seemingly deciding that the world should actually see what the US president is trying to pull here. And the letter hit the middle of a Gaza ceasefire that hadn't stopped the funerals, of course. Children still starving, aid agencies still reporting hunger, the ICC warrant on Netanyahu already published. I doubt any of that was what Herzog truly cared about, more the pressure that was being applied to himself, of course. 3 corruption indictments still sit on the Israeli calendar, of course so, attributed to Benjamin Netanyahu. And none of that has paused. None of it has moved. Trump still pushed his letter across Herzog's desk nonetheless and called it a case that shouldn't exist, publicly, deliberately. Cameras rolling. Nothing subtle about it, but Donald Trump doesn't do subtle, does he? The law stayed where it was, the trial stayed open, the ceasefire very much stayed very fragile, and Netanyahu not helping that one iota, despite Trump's claims. The paperwork keeps piling up around Netanyahu, and Trump still acts like one signature from Herzog could wipe away 5 years of evidence. But it didn't move a thing. It just showed who was trying to move it, the stunt he was trying to pull. And Herzog responded in the manner of a president being boxed in by procedure that he is required to respond to. So he thanked Trump for his support. He referred Trump back to Israeli law, though. He stated that anyone seeking a presidential pardon must submit a formal request for it. He stated that the office would follow established legal procedures. Herzog did not promise a review, therefore, nor did he hint at cooperation. He did not open a political door here for Donald Trump. He simply anchored himself to the legal process as it stands. He placed the responsibility for any next step on Netanyahu, which is exactly where it should be. Netanyahu had not requested a pardon, though. You'd imagine, why not? Why should he not have done this if he wants to get off these charges? Well, you see, Netanyahu could not accept the terms of a pardon because the law does not let a president hand one out on command. A pardon in Israel only begins when the person who wants it files a written request themselves. Not a hint, not a signal, a formal application with Netanyahu's name on it. Without that document, the presidency cannot move, you see. And the Justice Ministry has to receive one first. It has to open the file, it has to review the circumstances, and it has to send its recommendation forward. The presidency sits at the end of the train of process, not at the beginning of it. Most pardons only reach that stage after conviction, too, when the court has ruled and the sentence already exists. The process normally includes an admission of guilt from the applicant before anything is signed, and that's the crucial bit. That's the nugget here. That's how the system protects itself from political interference. Netanyahu would have to request a pardon. He would have to accept the offence. That would mean he would have to accept his own guilt. He's done none of that. He can't possibly do that. The one thing he refuses flat to do. So the indictments stay active, the evidence stays in the record, the trial stays open, the presidency stays locked inside its legal boundaries, and Netanyahu's silence remained the one fact the law cannot move around, no matter how much Trump might shake his tiny orange fists at it. The indictments have been built over several years now. Case 1000 covers gifts from a businessman, champagne, cigars, jewellery. Case 2000 covers conversations with a media mogul about manipulating coverage. Case 4000 carries the bribery charge, the big one. Regulatory favours for Bezek Communications in exchange for favourable coverage. Hundreds of millions of shekels in benefits. These cases were not rumours. They were filed by the Attorney General all the way back in 2019, and Netanyahu has now been dodging this for, 6 years almost now. They were upheld by Israeli courts. The charges have survived several legal challenges now. The trial has progressed through testimony. Former media executives have taken the stand. The court record is established fact itself now. Netanyahu faces 3 indictments. The police investigations have been public. The prosecutors have published their case summaries. Trump did not address any of those facts. Trump did not mention the evidence. Trump did not recognise the judicial independence of Israel even. He's too used to just getting his own way in all things, a big orange spoilt brat. He aimed his request at Herzog specifically as if the presidency could just wipe away 5 years of legal process, as if Trump could just skip to the end of the queue and the process could be done away with because he demanded it be so. He sees Herzog as his opposite number, president for president, but it's not nearly the same case. And the Likud response then arrived after that. All 19 Likud ministers, members of Netanyahu's own party, and deputy ministers signed a letter, and they sent it to Herzog as well. And they demanded that he pardon Netanyahu as well, emboldened as they have been. As a party, clearly the law means nothing to them either. They said the prosecution harmed the unity of the people. They called the charges trivial. They said the cases were political. They argued that cigars and champagne were inconsequential. Doesn't everybody get them, apparently? They argued that regulatory favours were defensible. They made the political case that the trials were an attack on the government itself. Their letter did not change the requirement for a formal request either, though. Their letter did not alter the need for an admission. Their letter did not affect the court record. It only created the impression of pressure. It attempted to frame the presidency as being the obstacle. It attempted to frame the legal system as the problem. It attempted to frame Netanyahu as a victim. It's Israel 101, isn't it? Him a victim after what we've seen him order for the last 2 years in Gaza. It's enough to make you physically sick. Herzog moved in a different direction, though. The only direction he can, because his position is largely ceremonial. He met with Attorney General Baharav-Miara and reportedly made clear that the Attorney General's position had not changed. The office would follow the law. The Attorney General did not recommend intervention. Herzog also met relatives of a former Gaza captives. One apparently suggested a pardon might give Netanyahu freedom to take political risks. Herzog listened to them. Herzog did not make any comment, though. He did not indicate any shift. He simply gathered the views part of his office is expected to gather. And therefore the law stays in place. The process stayed formal. The presidency remained tied to the framework that predated the war, predated the ceasefire, predated Trump's request. The ICC warrant sits under all of this like a weight nobody in power wants to mention. It was issued in late November last year. Starvation of civilians, murder, persecution, crimes against humanity. The charges are very public. The documents are still up. The world knows all about it. Israel tried to get the warrant thrown out. The judges rejected that back in July of this year. The warrant stays in force. The obligations under the Rome Statute stay in force. A domestic pardon in Israel can't touch any of that, even if it's delivered. It will not cancel an international arrest order. It won't erase the accusations. It won't stop an ICC member state from potentially detaining him if he sets foot on their soil. Everyone involved knows that. Trump ignores it. Likud ignores it. They all behave as if the corruption trial is the whole problem and the international case wasn't sitting there unchanged just because they themselves choose not to recognise that. Trump pushed his demand. Herzog pointed back at the law. Likud tried to add pressure. Netanyahu stayed silent. The Attorney General held the line. The courts kept running. The ICC sits outside of this entire performance. Their arrest warrant still very much a factor, regardless of what happens in Netanyahu's corruption trial. The hostage families added their voices. Gaza stayed in the background of every sentence. The ceasefire stays fragile. None of it shifted the legal machinery. Every event landed in order. Every contradiction built on the last, and the whole thing keeps circling the one fact none of them can bend to. The first contradiction lay in Trump's framing of Netanyahu as essential to peace. He described him as guiding Israel into a time of peace. The sentence implied that removing Netanyahu from office would jeopardize the ceasefire somehow, that this trial against the guy who had brought down and collapsed every previous ceasefire would collapse this one too. It implied that the prosecution was an obstacle to diplomacy. It implied the legal system was interfering with foreign policy. None of that appeared in the reporting from Israeli institutions. None of that appeared in Herzog's statement. Trump imported his narrative into a domestic legal crisis. He used the Gaza ceasefire as a lever. He used the language of peace to justify a legal intervention. The law did not respond to that rhetoric. He hasn't got his way. The legal system responded only to the statutory requirements. The second contradiction lay in Netanyahu's position. He could not request a pardon without admitting guilt. Israeli pardons generally require that admission of guilt. They are usually granted post-conviction too. Netanyahu denies all wrongdoing. He has denied all wrongdoing since the investigations began nearly 6 years ago. He's built his political identity literally around this claim of persecution, all of it being a witch hunt, as he's called it. He has tied his survival to the claim of political targeting. Therefore, he cannot enter a process that requires him to admit guilt. It would literally destroy him at this point, politically speaking. Trump asked Herzog to break procedure for someone who would never activate the process, therefore, and Likud demanded that Herzog override the law for someone who would never submit such a request. The political pressure grew around an action that only Netanyahu could initiate and only Netanyahu would never take. And the third contradiction lay in the ICC warrant. The domestic trial could be ended through a pardon, but the international case couldn't be. Trump's request does nothing to address the international criminal accusations, so he doesn't recognise them, of course. A domestic pardon for corruption would not affect those ICC charges. The starvation allegations would remain live. The murder and persecution counts would remain active. The warrant would remain issued. Netanyahu would remain internationally at risk. The idea that a domestic pardon would stabilise his position is just patently false. It remains false in every source. The Rome Statute obligations remain binding. Israel can act domestically in any way it chooses, but it could never reach The Hague. Trump's pressure ignores that reality. Likud's pressure ignores it too. They pretend it doesn't exist because they choose not to recognise it, but much of the rest of the world does. The international consequences stay outside their political structure, regardless of their attitudes. And the fourth contradiction lay in the political language. Likud calls the charges trivial. They call the prosecution political. They call for unity. The regulatory favours in case 4000 were in the hundreds of millions of shekels. The charges are not trivial. The indictments are not symbolic. The trial has admitted evidence. The judges have ruled on its admissibility. The political claims of triviality sit against a factual record that contradicts them. The political message targets the public, not the law. The courtrooms did not hear petitions calling the evidence trivial. The courtrooms heard witnesses describing benefits granted to Bezek. The courtroom heard testimony about editorial interference at Wallah. The courtroom heard details about luxury gifts. The political language attempted to rewrite the scale. The legal system did not adopt that rewrite. This story is less about the pardon and more about the nature of power in crisis. Trump's letter used the authority of the presidency to pressure a foreign institution. Likud's letter used the authority of the governing party to pressure the presidency. Netanyahu's silence used the authority of his office to avoid triggering the conditions. Herzog used the authority of his role to maintain the boundaries. The Attorney General used the authority of her office to uphold legal integrity. The ICC used its authority to maintain international accountability. The war in Gaza was used as a weight to shape the political landscape. The ceasefire created the timing. The pressure campaign exposed the machinery at work. The timeline creates its own rhythm. Trump's letter arrived. The publications quoted it. Herzog responded. Likud escalated. Herzog consulted. The Attorney General held the line. The ICC warrant remains unchanged by all of this. The Gaza ceasefire still holds for now, at least on paper, if not in practice, as Israel incessantly keep violating it. Netanyahu did not make any request himself, therefore the system has not moved one iota. The political class continued to speak. The law, however, continues to operate. Each sentence in the reporting built the picture. The pressure grew, but the outcomes did not shift. So by the time the media cycle had processed this sequence, the contradiction had just hardened into a simple reality. Trump had demanded something Israel could not legally provide. Likud had demanded something the presidency could not legally grant, and that they knew that he couldn't grant. Netanyahu refused to request the action they all claimed was essential, and Herzog held the position that the law required. The Attorney General stayed aligned with the court. The ICC remains separate. The ceasefire stays fragile. The war crimes allegations remain very much open, as they should. And the corruption case remains active, as it should too. The Gaza context is a cheap shot, but it remains undeniable. The demand for unity remains just political machinations. The demand for impunity was very much the subtext. These are the facts. Facts Trump does not acknowledge, refuses to acknowledge, or chooses to just ignore. It can't move beyond what the sources report. It cannot invent motive. It cannot create dialogue. It can only show the sequence. Trump demanded a pardon. Herzog explained the law. Likud joined the demand. Netanyahu stayed silent. The Attorney General held the legal position, and the ICC warrant very much exists, even if they deny that. The Gaza ceasefire was framed in the moment. The reporting documented each step. The law didn't bend. The political class attempted to bend around it. The gap between demand and reality exposed the truth, and the truth was very simple at the end of all of this. The peace process did not hinge on the legal immunity of one man. The ceasefire did not depend on the cancellation of a trial. The presidency could not deliver what Trump demanded. The legal system could not provide what Likud wanted, and the ICC would not be able to erase the accusations. The state could not pretend the evidence did not exist. The timeline could not be rewritten. The narrative could not make impunity a diplomatic requirement. The reporting left no space for ambiguity, so every single source lines up. The verdict lands where the facts sit. A peace deal that depends on the erasure of a criminal trial is not a peace deal. It's a demand for impunity. A presidency that refuses to break the law is not an obstruction. It's a line of defense. A governing party that calls evidence trivial is not defending unity. It's defending its leader. A foreign president demanding the dismantling of a legal process is not supporting peace. He's supporting one man. A domestic pardon cannot erase an international warrant. A courtroom cannot be replaced by political pressure. The ceasefire cannot be built on the denial of law. The final line remains as clear as the paperwork. The crisis is not the legal system. The crisis is the leadership trying to escape it. Netanyahu's trial must stand, and by Israel's own laws, it very much looks like it is actually going to. The law is a convenience to these people. There for others, not to apply to themselves, not to serve the state, but to serve them. And a classic example of this has also just come to light, and that's that the state has decided that Army radio is apparently now too free with its opinions and language. The IDF shouldn't be allowed to voice their views. They should be just following orders. And so Army radio, the troop morale booster in Israel that's been in place since 1950, now has to go, according to the deranged Defense Minister Israel Katz. So get the details of that assault on their own armed forces and their own free speech here. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.